The Stellar J is a YouTuber on the YouTube website who uploads YouTube videos. And in one of these videos, he is wrong. Okay, I mean, to be fair, he's not that wrong. He's like a little bit wrong. Not that YouTube commenters contain the ability to recognize you disagreeing with one thing doesn't mean you have to disagree with literally everything they've ever said. But you know, I thought I should at least mention it. The Stellar J's video that I disagree with is the problem with modern indie horror. I'll play some of the video, then I'll explain my problems with it.
Once upon a time in August 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's and PT are released 4 days apart. AAA studios kind of do their own thing, but this would mark the beginning of two very distinct categories in the indie horror scene: mascot horror and good horror. This branch is so boring, and I wanted to find out why.
Right off the bat, I have a big problem with this video's framing. While the phrase mascot horror versus good horror is played off for laughs in the video, it's also basically what the list is. If you read the top row of games, they're all something very specific. They're all games where a cartoon character or an animatronic or some other thing of childhood is actually alive and it's coming to kill you. But then if you look at the bottom games, there's like no correlation between them. You have Endless Hallway Game, Underwater Minecraft with monsters, visual novel with a demon inside. These games share very little similarities to each other. To express how ridiculous this categorization is to me, saying that these are the two possible paths that indie horror games can take, it's basically like saying, well, you know, there's two types of movies. There's kung fu movies and everything else. Obviously, the category with like 100 times the volume and diversity is going to contain more standout gems. This is a real problem I've noticed a lot of YouTube video essays have, where it's oversimplification to a massive degree.
Horror games have two ways of scaring you, two types of fear that they elicit. If you can effectively use both, your horror game will be so scary it's out of this world. You've never played a horror game until you've given yourself a 10-minute pep talk to enter a cave in Subnautica. You see, this is that first type of fear. Can you guess what it is yet? Once you know monsters can be anywhere, you're afraid that they could be everywhere. This first type of fear attacks your mind. It makes you see things that aren't there and imagine monsters to be way scarier than they actually should be. Your mind can't do all the work imagining the horror, and that's where the second type of fear comes in. This game is attacking your mind through and through. However, it also has this. And the voices sound like this. Faith attacks your mind, sure, but where it excels is attacking your senses.
There he goes again, categorizing everything in a broad subject into two categories. I think it's kind of stupid to try and categorize every type of fear you can fear into fear of the mind or fear of the senses. Now, unfortunately, I can't describe why I think it's stupid yet because of, well, pacing reasons.
And I'm sure you're going to be surprised to hear this, but FNAF actually does both of these. The whole atmosphere of the original pizzeria is just off-putting. The static from the cameras makes you imagine things that aren't there, and having to sit and wait for stuff to come to you while being forced to leave yourself vulnerable is just so... That is them attacking your mind. And on the senses, well, I think that's pretty obvious. Okay, cool. So just use both types of fear and your indie horror game will be good. Okay, video over. Thank you, patrons. Except if it were that fucking simple, we wouldn't have disasters like this thing. What the hell even is that?
What were they thinking?
The issue with Five Nights at Freddy's is that after the first night, the game just stops being scary, like on a dime. It just becomes micromanagement simulator. You might as well play fucking Roller Coaster Tycoon. Why does that happen? You see, PT prioritized attacking your mind, constantly thinking of new ways to screw with you, and attacking the senses came second. Whereas FNAF prioritized attacking your senses, and they couldn't even get that right.
Now here's where I do start having problems with his two definitions of types of fear. Because where's the line? What even is the difference between attacking the senses and attacking the mind? It might be hard to understand what I mean by this, so I'll give you a little thought experiment you can work with. I want you, right now, to think of an object, but you have to describe it without your senses. So you can't know what it looks like, you can't know what it feels like, it does not have a form you can comprehend, it does not have a smell, it doesn't even have any sort of sound associated with it. In case it's not perfectly clear, this is impossible to do. We are meat creatures whose only way of interacting with the outside world is through our senses. Without our senses, we have no relevant thoughts. Every fear is based on both senses and mind. Even conceptual fears, like loneliness, can only be experienced through the senses. If you can't see a person near you, if you can't feel a person near you, if you can't hear a person near you, how would you know you're alone? I mean, if you take a look at his list of how to attack the senses, there's a pretty clear pattern. They're all sounds. Every single example he could possibly think of is just a different form of sound. Does he not know that sight is a sense? I don't think so. That would be silly. The reason for this is he already described attacking sight as attacking the mind.
The whole atmosphere of the original pizzeria is just off-putting. The static from the cameras makes you imagine things that aren't there.
It feels really arbitrary what gets put into the sense fear category and what gets put into the mind fear category. But I think I know what the difference really is.
Once the novelty wears off and you understand what's happening, the logic kicks in and you no longer have any reason to be afraid. And that goes for any form of sense horror. This is why games that prioritize attacking the mind can stay scary for so long, because you never quite understand it all. The goal with PT was to remove all sense of comfort with the player. All of it. There is no HUD, there are no button prompts. The issue with Five Nights at Freddy's is that after the first night, the game just stops being scary, like on a dime. It just becomes micromanagement simulator. You might as well play fucking Roller Coaster Tycoon. Why does that happen?
When he's talking about the difference between fear of the mind and fear of the senses, what he's actually talking about is this: immersion and anticipation. Starting out with anticipation, the general principle is this: fear is kind of like a roller coaster. The longer you spend building something up, the more impactful the release is. If you have a game where, I don't know, let's say it tries to jump scare you every 2 seconds, like literally every 2 seconds, there's a constant thing that's trying to jump scare you. Guess what? When something actually jump scares you, it's not scary! Moving on to our next aspect, we have immersion. Immersion is a pretty simple concept to understand. The more the audience thinks, alright, this is a video game, I don't have to care, the less scary your game will be. So of course that stands to reason. Doing things that hurt game immersion, like, I don't know, let's just say having something that will potentially jump scare you every 2 seconds appear in front of you, and having a little thing you have to wind up in the corner constantly really hurts your immersion. It really reminds you that this is a video game and nothing about it is scary. Now, the reason Stellar J accidentally conflates these two aspects to mind horror is kind of simple. If you're not immersed in the game, or if the game constantly barrages you with scare after scare, the shadow on the wall or the noise down the hallway, it doesn't feel like a foreboding sign of what's to come. It feels like a random assault on your senses. Because you can't really separate your mind from your senses, they are just too interconnected. So in my opinion, what the real difference is whether or not you're actually engaging your mind. And a lack of anticipation. I did it again. I made the exact same grammatical error twice. Are you kidding me? A lack of anticipation or immersion makes it really hard to engage your brain. But here's the thing. Here's the bullet you have to bite. Here's the reason I made this video. Engaging gameplay is antithetical to being scary. The best example I can show of this dichotomy is actually in Stellar J's video.
When you are at your most scared, stressed out moment, desperately trying to get the last photograph, that is when it hits you with the jump scare. The issue with Five Nights at Freddy's is that after the first night, the game just stops being scary, like on a dime. It just becomes micromanagement simulator. You might as well play fucking Roller Coaster Tycoon. Why does that happen?
These two clips are the reason I made this video, because there are two things I agree with. One, Iron Lung is scary, and two, Five Nights at Freddy's is only really scary until you get jump scared for the first time. But then I started thinking, you're only scared for the first jump scare in Iron Lung 2. That's the thing. There's only one jump scare. If you really wanted to, you could hypothetically make a version of Five Nights at Freddy's that's just as scary as Iron Lung. And all you would need to do is make the first Five Nights basically pointless. Yeah, sure, it would be a lot scarier, but it would also be a lot less fun. Because despite Stellar J's personal opinion, people do play this game and replay it because they think the gameplay is fun.
It just becomes micromanagement simulator.
Once again, if you take a look at the bottom row of games, the good horror, most of them don't really challenge you that much. In PT, Doki Doki, and Iron Lung, you kinda just coast around till the end. The only two exceptions to this rule are one, Little Nightmares, which gets its difficulty not from the monsters but the puzzles and platforming, and Subnautica, which, well, Subnautica's cheating, but we'll get to that later. But the reason for this lack of difficulty in the scarier games is for a reason. One is the general diminishing effect of both monsters and jump scares. See, if you were scared of that the first time, it was definitely less scary that time. Again, much like the roller coaster allegory, the more often you use monsters, ghouls, or whatever, the less scary they'll be. Squid-Boy, couldn't you just, have every monster you fight be scarier than the last one? That way it's always scary? Well, unfortunately, no. Because you'll run into the FNAF 4 dilemma. Why would I be more scared of the bigger animatronic if they're both gonna kill me if they get to me? It's not like this one's gonna kill me more. And beyond that, having engaging gameplay reminds you that you're in a video game. We can use the mouse and arrow keys to move and look around on autopilot, sure, but generally speaking, the more you're doing, the less you're scared. Having engaging gameplay breaks immersion, and having challenging gameplay breaks anticipation. There really is no middle ground between engaging gameplay and being scary, unless you're cheating. Subnautica is one of the only games that can have engaging gameplay while remaining scary, but the reason it's able to do this is because it's cheating. You're not actually that scared of the Leviathan. The Leviathan itself isn't scary. What is scary is losing all of your stuff. For me personally, I think the scariest moment I've ever had is while playing hardcore Minecraft hearing a creeper. And it sure isn't because this thing is scary. For the same reason, I think FNAF generally gets scarier the later into the game you are. Because you're afraid of losing your progress, not the same stupid jump scare over and over. Yes, engaging gameplay subtracts from horror. So what? If making games mechanically simpler makes them scarier, just do it. Seven is a crime horror movie starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, and allegedly some third actor, I don't know. Seven shook up the landscape when it was first released. It has rave critical reviews and is considered an all-time classic. Seven is not scary. I mean, yeah, it's disturbing, but throughout the movie, you're never really that scared. The victims are people we don't really know, and the protagonists seem to be almost untouchable. So what exactly happened? How does a horror movie that's not scary get such great reviews? They must have made some kind of mistake. Well, no, they didn't. Simply put, scary doesn't equal good. I feel like internet discourse overvalues how important being scary is to having a good horror movie or game. So much of online content about horror is just about how to make something scary, or whether or not something is or isn't scary. And frankly, I think a lot of this focus on being scary is making horror worse. Because these people are so concerned with making sure their product is scary, they don't stop to think if it actually has a point. There is no movie that I think illustrates this point better than Smile. If you don't know, the unironic message of Smile, the moral of the story, is that if you have severe trauma, you should kill yourself before you pass it on. And the reason for this movie's message being the backwards enigma that it is they were trying to be scary. They cared more about having a scary ending than they did the movie having a point. You see, in my opinion, there's actually two types of horror. Yeah, I know, I just berated the Stellar J for lumping complex things into just two categories, but you haven't considered this. It's different when I do it. You see, there's scary horror, where the main goal is to scare you, but then there's also creepy horror, which uses horror as a backdrop to achieve something else. And in the case of video games, this is often engaging gameplay. Some of the best games of all time have been creepy horror. Games like Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil 4 are very rarely actually trying to scare you, because trying to scare you would hurt the gameplay. The constant amount of enemies is bad for anticipation, and the varied mechanics and frequency of restarts are bad for immersion. But these mechanics help make the game more fun, and they give the games their identity. And this is one of the big problems I have with this video. Five Nights at Freddy's isn't scary after the first few nights because it's not trying to be. The purpose of the game changes from being scary to being the micromanagement simulator, becoming a puzzle that you have to solve. Now, there is definitely a place for scary games that prioritize being scary. I just think Stellar J's mistake was comparing apples to oranges. It's like that one quote. I mean, sure, it definitely wasn't said by Albert Einstein, but I think it's pretty relevant. Judging games that prioritize gameplay over being scary, they are obviously going to be less scary than games that prioritize being scary. And also, do you know why most of the games on the top row aren't scary at all? Well, it's the same reason that Kirby games are really easy. These games are for babies. Children are very obviously their target demographic, and it's not even close. I mean, these franchises literally sell toys in the kids section of Walmart. Hello Neighbor has a terrible cartoon made for kids. And every time someone smugly says that they're not scary, I just imagine them smugly bragging about them reading Goosebumps with the lights off at age 25. Seriously, someone needs to conduct a scientific study on why so many people on YouTube are incapable of understanding they're not the target demographic for everything.
Security system takes control of Squid-Boy's house and begins attacking the city, leaving the mayor to discover community service for the damage he caused, even though SpongeBob and Patrick were in his house the whole fucking time and were responsible for everything.
Fuck this episode!
Being that these games are for kids, they have less tools to scare you. One, obviously because not everything is appropriate for kids, but two, because kids are really stupid. Simply put, kids are really bad at comprehending more cerebral horrors. A good example of this are the backrooms. Now, you probably don't remember this because of the sheer overwhelming flood of brain rot. But the backrooms are actually conceptually pretty scary. An infinite void of broken reality where you're completely alone for the rest of your life is terrifying. But what did kids do when they learned about the backrooms? Oh well, that idea is pretty good, but you know what would make it even better? If there was a big scary monster chasing you. And also that monster was SpongeBob for some reason. A phenomenon only slightly less annoying than actual adults complaining that this was ruining the backrooms. Like guys, it's all written stories. If you don't like it, you can literally just imagine something different. It is that easy. A lot of kids like scary things and a lot of kids like horror. And I think they should be allowed to consume that media they want, even if it's terrible. I think my main problem with the Stellar J video is his thesis is just kind of wrong. His list of games inspired by FNAF vs PT is super biased. Even putting aside the fact that the FNAF list is literally only one genre and mostly comprised of kid games, what is Garden of Banban even doing here? This is an unprofessionally made, free Steam game that only got popular due to irony, and yet it's being held up as if it's a pillar of the genre. This is like claiming Chopkick Panda is a pillar of animated kung fu movies. And furthermore, one of these games is blatantly on the wrong side of the list. It's Iron Lung. If you actually think about it objectively, Iron Lung's gameplay is very inspired by Five Nights at Freddy's. Think about the setup for the game. You're alone in an enclosed area. You can't run away. The only way to see the outside world, the true danger, is through a shoddy old camera. All the while, you're being pressured into efficiency by a draining resource you need to survive. All of these things can also be said for the first Five Nights at Freddy's. But the problem is, Iron Lung is considered good horror, so admitting its heavy inspiration from Five Nights at Freddy's would hurt the thesis of the video. I want to make this clear. I don't hate Stellar J. I don't even dislike him. His videos are definitely better than mine, I'll say that. And the video I've been criticizing isn't even an exception to that. Most of this video is praising good horror games, and I like most of this video. I just think too often in video essays, we try to go for big sweeping statements. Everything can be broken down into two categories. Scary equals good. Inspiration from Five Nights at Freddy's means your game will be bad. Inspiration from PT means your game will be good. But these are rarely completely true. Art is just more complicated than what's convenient for us. If there really was the step-by-step process to make a good art product every single time, there would be a lot less bad art. Trust me, as someone who has spent time actually developing video games, it's really difficult. It's much easier to point out flaws from a detached point of view. But when your feet are actually on the ground and you're making something, every little step feels like a miracle. That's just about all the time I have today. If you really want to, please consider subscribing, like the video, and do the third one. You know, the one with the bell. YouTubers talk about that one. I don't know what they're talking about, but you should do that one too.